Welcome to That Pennsylvania Witch podcast. My name is Caitlin Dawn. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into That Pennsylvania Witch podcast. Today, we're exploring a spiritual tradition that blends cosmology, culture, folklore, and lived practice into something deeply personal and communal. Our guests today are the authors of a new book. A new book.
That too, birch.
Yeah, well, that too. Birch beer. Maybe it was a Freudian slip. I want birch beer. They're the authors of a new book. What's that?
I got some.
Oh, okay. Well, that doesn't help me. I'm super far away from you right now. Unless you guys haven't been forthcoming about inventing some sort of travel.
No, we just need to set up those vacuum tubes between it among all of our houses. Like they have at banks, you know?
Gotta get to work on the tube technology. Oh my gosh, I love this. Okay. Our guests today are the authors of a new book that serves not just as an introduction to Urglaawe, but a year-long companion for anybody curious about building a meaningful spiritual path. I'd like to welcome Michelle, Stacey, and Robert today. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I know we were chatting a little bit, and that's one of my favorite things about you, Rob, is that we can kind of run off on squirrel tangents and
chipmunks.
We have chipmunks.
Chipmunk tangents. It's chipmunk energy.
If I'm being honest, I don't think I have squirrels. I think I have weasels.
Weasels?
Yeah, I think
like Eli Weasel. That's how people pronounce Alalicio.
How is that again?
Or Alalicio observance. Some people call it Eli Weasel.
I think that might have been how I was pronouncing it, if I'm being honest. For listeners who haven't heard of Urglaawe before, how would you describe it in a sentence or two? And could you pronounce it properly? Because I'm butchering it.
Okay, Urglaawe. Urglaawe. That's some people say Urglaawe. That's very American. Or Urglaawe. And that's one that makes me cringe. My other personal favorite is Urglaawe, but Urglaawe. The stress is usually on depending on, just like in English, sometimes you say adult, sometimes you say adult, depending on, so the stress is usually on the first syllable when you have UR words. So Urglaawe is a modern iteration of the ancient Germanic religion as seen through the lens of the living Pennsylvania culture. That's my elevator speech. Obviously, I'm getting off at the first floor.
It's a good elevator speech. Does anybody have anything to add to that?
It is a perfect wrap-up of exactly what the book is.
Okay, we're done.
Okay, thanks, everybody. That's a wrap. I was really digesting that because I think the way that you described it is really beautiful.
Thank you. It's better than one of the Philadelphia newspapers once described it. It wasn't the city paper, it was one of the other ones. They described it Urglaawe. Not only is Urglaawe the sound that a peasant's throat makes when you stab it with a spear.
Seriously? What's the rest?
The rest of it was fine. It was also the name for a heathen religion through the Pennsylvania Dutch cultural lens or something like that.
Dark.
That was from like 2008 or something like that. I still love that.
It's pretty on brand for the old German fairy tales, right? Like, I mean,
yeah, but we're nicer people. We're farmers. We only pick up weapons and hurt people when we have to. What
inspired you to write a book that lays out a year-long framework for this religion?
I mean, honestly, it was everybody asking. Truthfully, it was Rob and I met in 2012, I think it was. And as the religion grew and we, people were coming out to the rituals more often, and we had Facebook groups and whatnot. It was sort of like people who were not local all wanted to know what this was about and how they could celebrate the observances and, what the deities were and who they were. It became sort of obvious that we needed to have something that put it all in one place rather than trying to link various articles across the interwebs into the groups. And I started the outline in 2017 with the intention that it was only going to be a book on the observances, just sort of like a day in the year of an Urglaawe. But as we started going through all this and realizing that, there was so much more to cover, the book expanded and it took a life of its own. So
yeah, it took several lives in the process. Because the first draft, I had first made up a little booklet in 2009, and it was a brief introduction to Urglaawe or something like that. That eventually stemmed into the dictionary of Urglaawe terminology years later. But that was a very small, thin publication that I had using one of those binding machines that you have at work where they have the plastic things. But it did help. And some of the stuff that's in there actually evolved into parts of this book too. But the dictionary was what got most of that. So Michelle was a driving force behind us getting that book going. I was a hindering force, particularly when I got COVID. I mean, that set us back years, quite literally, because COVID I had very badly. I didn't come out of COVID fog until sometime later in 2021, and I got in the beginning of 2020. Then ultimately, the one who dragged us across the finish line was ultimately Stacey.
Who signed on to be an editor, and we drug her into it much more deeply than that.
Oh my goodness!
How bawdy are we allowed to be in this?
I'm not rated for children, so as bawdy as you like.
Well, let's put it this way: we were trying to make one of our deadlines, and Stacey, her husband Mike, and I were at Free Spirit Gathering, and we're working on this where were we at? We were under a canopy. And we were under Stacey's sitting there typing away. Meanwhile, in the tent behind us, there's two couples that are obviously mixing things up there a little bit and becoming rather shriekish and quite shriekish to the point where Michael and I are looking at each other like, how is Stacey not noticing this? And she's just banging away on the computer while other things are banging away nearby.
And like I said, there's a reason my nickname is Oblivious Girl.
But eventually, the best part is she finishes the section she's in, and she looks up from her computer. She's like looking at Michael and me. She's like, "What? What?" We're like, "You're not noticing this? What? What? We're noticing what?" Of course, by that point, it already sort of drifted away, but we digress anyway. So that's how involved Stacey was.
I had the pleasure of taking the different voices that had been originally.
Not as much pleasure as the voices that were going on behind us,
and kind of polishing them into one voice for the book rather than just the different people.
It really is a living tradition. As someone who is lucky enough to learn from you guys in person and from my mentor, I was psyched to get my hands on this copy of this book. But when I started delving into it, I know this sounds cheesy. I'm going to be super cheesy and I don't care, but it's such a warm welcome to Pennsylvania Dutch folk magic. Oh my gosh, the recipes, by the way, I've already tried 2.
Ooh, which one?
The bacon dressing.
Oh, ooh.
Well, I don't know. When I was hanging out with you guys, someone had made that.
Oh,
and I don't know.
Yeah, Kathy.
And I've always.
Anything Kathy makes is great.
Yes.
I've tried to make my own.
Kathy hears this interview.
Yeah, kudos to Kathy because I think I was gonna arm wrestle V for it at one point, but and then the other one was a spice cake.
Oh yeah.
So. I don't know. It's just a lot of books have, seasonal books about Sabbats or the Wheel of the Year or other types of, modern neo-pagan traditions. They do have recipes and things like that. But this one it's so nice how you tie them into your Wheel of the Year, into your cosmology. It's just really, really well done.
And that's not to say there won't be similarities. Like we have raised dough and other traditions have the hot cross buns instead of the fashnats. I mean, there's similarities, but I like that we have our own cultural identity with them.
Yeah.
Michelle even used the book to make her own recipes.
I did.
Did you?
It was easier than trying to read the recipe that my aunt gave me because the actual recipe that I have from my aunt for the fashnats, which is in the book, her recipe is so tiny. Now that I'm older, I always have to get out the magnifying glass or use my phone to try to read that recipe. So it was I have a proper book now that I can open and look at this recipe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I use the book for my own family recipe.
I've opened it up. I can't tell you how many times. Michael opened it up the other morning right before ritual, be like, hey, what color should I wear? I mean, it's already people, even us, we're picking it up and being like, hey, I need to find out this part.
It is funny what Stacey just said too, because even though I know pretty much everything that's in that book, I still open it up and don't remember writing parts of it, or I don't remember it being edited, or I don't remember which one of us wrote some of this stuff, which in a way it's kind of cool because it makes me feel like a baby heathen again to a degree. I'm going to wander into the weeds for the first time here, I think. Well, not the first time.
Wander away.
Maybe, 6, 7 times. But sorry, I was still a teacher, the mind shift that it takes to really kind of remove yourself from, especially if you grew up in a practicing Christian household, take yourself away from everything that you've known and to put yourself in to see the whole world through the pagan or heathen eyes is a big process. I have some people I know who are going through the baby heathen growth actually don't like that time because it's very unsettling to them to have to question everything they know. But most baby heathens I know kind of enjoy those moments of eureka, those moments of discovery where you realize something that your grandparents have once said to you and you hear it in a whole different context. Even something as simple as it's raining, it's pouring, the old man is snoring. Well, who's the old man? When you start putting those little pieces of culture into context, they start seeing that the paganism, the heathen backgrounds have been with us the whole time, just buried under these layers. Every time I come across one of those things, it's kind of exciting. When you're watching Disney movies and you're seeing the old Germanic undercurrent of I don't remember which ones are which, but you see the
Beauty and the fairy godmothers.
The fairy godmothers, which just came up here in the current observance of Entstehung, that the fairy godmothers are the same as the Edis in our religion, and that to me was one of the most exciting times of my life, was going through that mind shift and getting all these little bits and pieces and things that I've grown up with. Yes, and the Pennsylvania Dutch culture is loaded with them. Just like it's mainstream American culture is loaded with them too, just from a slightly different perspective. Recognizing just how pagan and heathen the Easter Bunny really, really, really is. Groundhog Day, but that our culture was the vehicle for both the Easter Bunny and the groundhog. And all that stuff, when you start to realize it, it really makes it very exciting for me. And as I've gotten older now, and those little eureka moments are fewer and farther between because I've already experienced so much, but they still come up every now and again. There's going to be something just pops up. And to me, it's like a moment of wonder that just kind of reinforces why we're doing all this. And it's those little wonders that make life really worth living and very exciting. So, okay, I'm ready to come in from the weeds now, but.
Oh, already? I think that's beautiful.
I'll be back out.
Because it's kind of hidden in plain sight. We, the living tradition, you guys have been honing these practices based off of the resources that you have and the things that you have found out due to your diligent research. One of the most important things about your book and why it is set apart from so many of the others, because you can tell that this is a labor of love based off of your lived experiences, and all of you shine through in each of these chapters.
The recipes, Michelle and Stacey, shine through. I'm just kind of along for the ride in those, but
we've always been a taste tester, so
there you go.
True.
You can add yourself that way.
So who did you imagine reading this book when you started writing it?
There were a couple demographics that I actually thought of initially when the book first became an idea. The one was, of course, people who are part of the Urglaawe community are interested, and also the people who are interested in studying Braucherei or Hexerei, from the Urglaawe perspective. That was another one, and both those two are true. The third one, which is probably lesser so, but I think it's going to make its way there eventually, are people who are trying to learn the Pennsylvania Dutch language in its current uses, and outside of just old hymns and biblical things and stuff like that, with modern terms that we are using for computers. I think we don't have that in the book per se, but we have a lot more vocabulary in our book that people aren't going to come across in a lot of places because Urglaawe is officially bilingual. And so there are many concepts that we utilize that aren't really written about in other contexts within the Pennsylvania Dutch language. So that is another demographic. Those are the ones that I imagined beforehand. In process here, I'll let Michelle speak to that.
I was just going to say, well, I think for me, going into it, I came from a pagan background rather than a heathen background. And, those words are interchangeable for the most part. But when you think about the traditional pagan versus the traditional heathen, I would have identified myself as a pagan before coming to Urglaawe. My thought process was Urglaawe is such a special religion. I don't necessarily consider it either or. I sort of feel like Urglaawe is its own thing. And I feel like it can appeal to both subsets of the non-traditional religion. And I sort of saw this as a way to bring in folks from either side of, that divide across Europe, so to speak, heathens being northern traditions and pagans being southern traditions. And because I feel like there are a lot of things that we do in our tradition that people may look at and say, well, that's pagan. You know what I mean? That it has that more pagan feel to it rather than a strictly heathen feel. So in my mind, I sort of saw this as a book to bridge those mindsets and bring both of those groups together. And obviously, you know, we don't proselytize and we won't recruit people, but if we can bring people in that are, you know, respectful seekers, that's ultimately the goal.
You guys are community builders. So we spoke about what Urglaawe is. What is the difference between Braucherei and Hexerei? I know the answer, so don't come out, because I know I'm learning this stuff.
Isn't that in the book?
Yes, it is in the book.
It is.
So are you asking the difference between those two words? Are you asking the difference between Braucherei and Hexerei and Urglaawe?
Let's go for it.
Why not all of them?
Okay,
yeah,
so
there we go.
Let's start with the distinctions between Urglaawe and Braucherei and Hexerei. Urglaawe is the religion. It is the practice we have that has the deities and has the observances and all of those worldview type concepts. Braucherei and Hexerei are the folk magic traditions of the Pennsylvania Dutch. Braucherei and Hexerei can be practiced within the context of most religions, but not the absence of one. So you find practitioners of Braucherei and Hexerei that are, and again, I'm using the terms interchangeably, and I will touch on that in a minute, but Braucherei and Hexerei can be practiced. You'll find Christian practitioners, you'll find Wiccan practitioners, you'll obviously find Urglaawe practitioners. We focus on it from the Urglaawe perspective, obviously, and how our worldview fits into that within the folk magic practice. Now, when you're trying to make a distinction between Braucherei and Hexerei, and sometimes you also hear the word powwow, that's where it gets a little more complicated, because depending on where you are in Pennsylvania Dutch country or the Deitcherei, those terms can be used for different purposes. In Berks County, where Rob and I both grew up, Braucherei was very much the good practice and Hexerei was very much the bad practice, being that Hexerei definitely meant witchcraft. So when you were talking to people in mainstream culture, we're a witch if you were practicing Hexerei. As Urglaawe, we don't have that dualistic mentality, so we look at them as complementary traditions.
Where spectrum, actually.
Huh?
Like a spectrum, actually.
Yeah. So Braucherei ends up being sort of a more outward expression of the practice, being for the good of community. And it's more focused, I would say, on the healing, whereas Hexerei is a much more internal and immersive tradition where you're focused more on your inner practices and protective magic. Although both can have all of the things, we call them modalities, sympathetic magic, energetic healing, journey work, herbalism, all those different things can exist in both of them. But I think ultimately what we want people to try to remember is that the Braucherei is the outward community expression and Hexerei is the immersive internal focus.
So if we go by adverbs of motion or prepositions, upward and outward for Braucherei, downward and inward for Hexerei, like deep dives. Stacey, have anything to add to that? I mean,
not at all.
Yeah, and I also like to make sure too, when people come to Urglaawe, it's not an automatic that you're going to be learning Braucherei Hexerei. I think over the years, a lot of people have come to the religion thinking that they were going to learn Braucherei and Hexerei. And while a lot of the things that exist within Braucherei and Hexerei informed Urglaawe, because that's where the stuff was like kind of kept, you know what I mean? Yeah. All the things that got lost over the years, while the Braucherei and Hexerei practitioners maintain those, even though they were not necessarily like sharing them, that's where all of that content remains. So we took that to help us establish Urglaawe. But just because you come to Urglaawe does not mean that you're going to become an apprentice in the Braucherei and Hexerei tradition.
Yeah, and everything Michelle said was like spot on. Actually, I think we're both relieved that we don't have to say all that. But the floodgates really opened when we started. When I started interviewing people who identified as Hexerei practitioners, because, like I said, where Michelle and I grew up, they were looked at as the same coin with two distinct sides. But in other parts of the Deitcherei, there are people use one word to describe the entire thing. Out in central Pennsylvania, they'll call it Hexerei all around. Up in the far northern Pennsylvania, they might call it Braucherei to describe everything. But in Berks County and some of the other core areas in the heartland, they always had this distinction. So, when I started interviewing the Hexerei practitioners, I began to see a lot of the things that were stereotypes of Hexerei practitioners just crumbling. Because of the satanic panic thing, oh, well, that's a satanic practice. And all the people I had interviewed at one point when I first mentioned, I can't remember how many identified Hexerei practitioners there were at that point. I think there were 50-some. Not a single one of them had actually even believed in Satan, and the one who didn't want anything to do with him because he was too Abrahamic. So, so we started as Hexerei practitioners ourselves. We began to work to define Hexerei from its own perspective, because prior to that, it was always being described and defined by its enemies. It was always the people who were hardcore Christians who were defining what Hexerei was, or, quote, journalists, end quote, who were trying to undermine the culture by writing articles that were very heavily skewed against the cultural practices in general, or misinterpreting them, targeting women, things like that, back in the 20s and the 30s. And a lot of times what they were describing were charlatans, not actual Hexerei practitioners. So we've gone through a whole lot of evolution on that. And, I'm sure that there will be people who see it differently from us, but this is the way Urglaawe views it, and this is the way we view it, and it is what it is. So
you guys all grew up in some way, shape, or form immersed in this. It's really unique that you guys are able to just tell these stories. It seems like you have a compulsion and a drive to make sure that the story doesn't die, because that happens so often. And in pulling out these hidden elements in songs and poems and stories, bring them to life. It's really fantastic that you guys are doing that. How many people did you interview? You said that you were interviewing people to get more perspective.
Well, the exact number, let's see. My Braucher grandfather interviewed 80. My mentor, my Braucher mother and her husband interviewed 8. I've interviewed 176. I have 176 interviews. Now, my 176 interviews, I have to put a caveat on that by saying they're not all necessarily 176 distinct interviews, because sometimes I've gone back to somebody I interviewed before for more information, or they had something else from me that would count as a separate interview. A lot of those people were Hexerei practitioners who were very much underground, didn't want their names known, didn't want neighbors to know that they did this stuff or whatever. And I've also been at Braucherei, places where Braucherei practitioners lived in the same retirement home, and interviewed multiple people at the same time, including, people who would get in arguments over things as ridiculous as what the difference was between a barn elf and a house elf, and, how you could tell by their clothing, things like that. Some of these people are going to go into fisticuffs over it. Privacy was always a very distinct thing, because a lot of these people, most of these people were above age 90. There were some in their 80s and some in their 70s. They really had seen a lot in their lives, and they really some of them were just trying to get what they knew off their plates, because their kids weren't interested in it at all, or they thought some of their kids thought they were silly old beliefs and things like that. And some of them may be silly old beliefs, but silly old beliefs still carry a lot of information about the cultures of the past. And I eagerly interviewed anybody, and I would come across people in odd situations sometimes. It might just be something that I heard somebody say when we're out at a restaurant, and ask them a question about it. That might constitute an interview. But others were more formal. And, the first Hexerei interviews that I did, I had to come with vouchers proving that I was trustworthy. They had to be arranged by a common person I know, and I had to come with a piece of paper that had a certain sign on there from the person vouching who I was. And the primary reason that I got in that door was because I spoke Pennsylvania Dutch. So even if half of them continued the interview in English, but that was what got me in the door.
Were there any stories that stood out in all of those interviews, or that you would be able to share without?
No, I mean, some of them are the myths, or or the various versions of the myths. I mean, some, including a few that I heard versions or partial versions of when I was growing up. But also cryptid stories, things like that. Cryptozoological figures. There were a couple things that I kind of left out, like things about how people believe that John Wilkes Booth was acting upon. There was one lady who was actually interviewing for Virginia back in 2009. I didn't put this anywhere really, but she was convinced that John Wilkes Booth was a Hexerei practitioner who had got himself bound up by something he read and was possessed by baneful spirits to go shoot Abraham Lincoln. Things like that. That was kind of bizarre. That woman, if I remember correctly, also did provide some interesting information about other things related to cryptids in Maryland, which relates to the Stalageist. So the interviews were taking place all over the place. I've gone to Ontario, I've gone to Wisconsin, I've gone to Ohio and West Virginia and Maryland and Virginia and North Carolina. Gotten interviews from all those places. Plus, occasionally had run-ins with people like the old man who called me on my home phone, which I still don't know how that guy got my number, and wanted me to meet him down at Kelpius Cave at 2:00 in the morning. And idiot here went. But,
Went.
Yes.
By
He got
yourself?
he got a stern talking to by a bunch of us after we found out about it. Didn't let anybody know he was doing it, but told us after the fact.
And you told
I'm like,
Michelle,
that's
you
stupid.
told
Like,
him, you told Rob
Huh?
that we've all grown fond of him and that he's not to. But how did it go?
It was the guy was really he was like older than Methuselah, and he was obviously somebody who had been trained in Braucherei or Hexerei. I can't give this away here. He didn't know certain Braucherei things. I was able to get around all his defenses very easily because there were certain things he was not prepared for, and he was not harmful. He was literally trying to tell me that the Rosicrucians had no claim to Kelpius Cave and that Urglaawe would be better claimants to it. And I was like, but the founders of Kelpius Cave were a pietist sect of Christianity. He's like, so he's like, yeah, but they were also mystics, and some of the things that you guys are pursuing are far more in line with, what Kelpius's mission was. And people who don't know about Kelpius Cave, that one right there, that was an interview of my own. I was long ago, I was asleep, and I kept having this dream about a dark room with a glint of light, of dim light in the background, and all these men discussing land boundaries and things like that. And they were turning around. They decided they would talk to the leader in the morning. So when they stepped, it was all in Pennsylvania Dutch. And when they stepped out, I woke up with the phrase, Germantown caves on my head, except in Deitsch, Deitschstädel, Deiche. And I was like, well, that was awfully vivid. So I started looking up about Germantown caves. That's when I first really came across Kelpius Cave. Even though I've heard of it before, that was the first time I actually placed it in history as a Pennsylvania Dutch first generation, actually Transylvania Dutch. He was from Transylvania place. But that was also when I learned about how early in the migration from the German lands to here, the earliest settlers were living in caves along the Delaware River. Those caves eventually got cemented up by the British, the people that were too rowdy. That from those caves is where they were laying out the land, the property distributions in Germantown as they were getting ready to establish that. And I keep wondering if that's what my dream was about. Some of those caves, most of that whole area is Front and Green Streets in Philadelphia, and that area is pretty much all under I-95 right now, except possibly for some of the cellars, and those 200 block of Hancock Street might actually connect to the root cellars by just like a near level, but I haven't been able to get in anybody's house there. They haven't let me in. I haven't knocked on any doors, but it's possible that there might be some way to get into those caves now. While I do enjoy going into underground Philly, I'm not 16 anymore, so I don't go raiding the streets of Philadelphia anymore. But it would be interesting to see it. But see, so like things come up out of nowhere. I really had no idea about that whole thing with the earlier settlers being in there, but I have been able to find, a few references to it, which are, I think they're cited in the book or they're cited somewhere.
If anybody's listening that lives in that area that wants to let Rob and hopefully me and Michelle, I'm going to just join along, Stacey as well, explore the cave system in your basement. That sounds like a Nicolas Cage movie, and I'm here for it.
See, again, the basements may be totally isolated, but somewhere under there were the caves, and the 200 block of Hancock Street, right by Penn Herb, but because Front and Green Street, that whole area where the old riverfront used to be, because the river's been built upon and moved in, diverted over the years, as is the case with most major cities. Oh, my cat is conjuring. If you guys can see her doing her little conjure thing.
Oh my goodness.
Just trying to conjure her way up on the couch.
I love when
Come on.
that.
But I love that. Do you live on Hancock in that area? Do you have a weird old mine shaft in your basement? Would you be willing to let random strangers explore your basement? I mean, I'm just saying, it's really cool.
It wouldn't even be a mine shaft. It would be like a literal cave.
Like
a bricked up opening somewhere. Somewhere in the basement if you have a bricked up opening.
I mean, who knows? Because again, that's a long time ago. And Hancock Street probably wasn't even Hancock Street then, because John Hancock wasn't around. John Hancock wasn't known in the time we're talking about. We're talking about like probably the mid 1680s, like 1683, 1684. So John Hancock's name hadn't been established yet, but that cave system would have still been around there. Again, I don't know much about caving. I mean, over here in Bristol Township, I've learned in the process of all this that Bath Road in Bristol was named because there literal was a geothermic bath over here that was also cemented in, except that was last century, by the Americans who, for some reason, didn't want people to take advantage of the healing salts and everything there. I don't know, but we digress.
Well, that's fascinating. And it's not surprising that existed in this area. Very cool.
But the weird thing was that that I don't think many of us knew about the people living in the caves when they first got here, which I think is something that everybody tends to have a romantic notion of the arrival in Philadelphia. I mean, if you go to the Pastorius Monument in Germantown, and it shows like the boat with the people walking off with their arms full of food stuff and stuff, bringing things in from Germany. That looks great, but it was more, I think, more like a matter of desperation, getting off the boat with barely anything in your hands, especially that early on, and not even having a town laid out for you. So, yeah, I think that we're well to do to remind ourselves of what people actually experienced back then and how much help it took for people to get here. We arrived on these shores not as colonists. We arrived on these shores as refugees. They were the first large refugee population to get here. And we had help from many of the people in the Netherlands who sheltered our ancestors on their way out. Some lived in English ports or near English port cities for a while until they could get the clearance to come here. When they got here, there wasn't much here except for, Philadelphia or Baltimore if they went there, or, New Orleans even if they went there, which was a little later, in New York, which was also a little bit later. Actually, New York was earlier, but all those were at the same different times. But when they got here, and the Native Americans when they moved out into the frontier, which the frontier was like right here.
No, that's really cool. I found out recently there was like an update for one of the companies I sent my DNA off to. It's probably being used for nefarious purposes somewhere, whatever, that I have Germanic Transylvanian ancestry, and I had no idea.
I'm going to tell the roundabout way of how I found Urglaawe and my Pennsylvania Dutch family. You want to touch base with your ancestors. I've been pagan all my life. I was not raised Christian at all. My parents were like, hey, learn about a bunch of things and choose yourself. And cool. I choose to be a pagan. Well, we don't want you to choose that. I mean, typical. So I was pagan from what I'd say from 16 on. Became Wiccan early to mid 90s. I found a group in 2000 and I was with them for 20 years. Towards the end of that time though, I was leaning heathen because for some reason the Wicca I was practicing just wasn't aligning with some of what I was needing in my own spiritual life. So I was definitely leaning more heathen. Mutual friends had talked about Urglaawe and I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. And I started poking around. Interestingly, I had gotten injured in 2019 and I actually had to come off the ambulance. I wasn't able to work anymore. And I started doing like little art in the park things. And I think I did a pride event that first year. And then that first year, Rob put out like a call to action for saving the Oakdom or Othala rune from white supremacists. So I designed a bunch of pins with it was my first design specifically for inclusivity, and it went through a change after that. We added the trans stuff, which wasn't in that first iteration. I came to them like really I was guided unknowingly, but I ended up with them. It was the ancestors. When I was looking into trying to find healing that was in tune with my ancestors, I went to my father's side of the family. My mother is Czech and Irish, and my father is Mexican and Puerto Rican. Well, as far as authentic healing with the Irish and Czech things, I can't go over there for it, right? So I was like, okay, well, the Mexicans and Puerto Ricans are actually still here. What can I see about that? And it was the Mexican grandmother that had married the Pennsylvania Dutch gentleman who was a teacher out in Puerto Rico when they met, and he brought her back and they had kids happily ever after. But it was interesting that when I reached for a healing modality that was connected to me ancestrally, that side of the family pointed me to another part of the family to get that healing education. I just found it really interesting that things panned out that way,
It is fascinating what we uncover. And sometimes, in fact, more often than not, I teach all over the place, just random things, whatever my brain weasels guide me to. Almost everybody who tells their story, their origin story, like, so hey, how come you got into this weird stuff like me? Well, a lot of times they're drawn to it, and then after that, they find out that they have ancestry that links them to this specific practice. And I think that's what's so beautiful about being a seeker and why we're compelled. There's something that we're searching for.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's really powerful. Thank you. That was extremely relevant, Stacey.
I am finding so much more about these caves just in random Google searches now. It's just funny that I'm finding more and more about these sites now than I did back when I had that dream. When I had that dream, I'm sure that these articles were there, but like Google searches, I wasn't really finding much. But I'm noticing the dates on all the ones that I'm finding, and they're after I had that dream. I don't know. That's something else that I think is kind of funny. Is that it seems like many of us all pick up on signals or impulses from history at the same time. And it's not necessarily just limited to Urglaawe or Heathenry or paganism, but it's like many of us, regardless of our background, suddenly get a sense about something and start doing our own research, and a lot of it ties in together. It's kind of like how within Urglaawe, like, all of a sudden everybody's hearing Caesar or everybody's hearing Saga or like connecting to one deity or another or something else. But that I think it seems to transcend religion and go into the history of the past. People are picking up on things. I find that fascinating. I find it fascinating finding this many references to it already.
Well, I always say that anthropology and history is a gateway drug towards paganism or earth-centered animistic anything, because all of those experiences tend to be so validating. You're sitting there just gobsmacked. You have a feeling about something, you've always been curious about something, and then you find out, oh, lo and behold, you're the long-lost relative of so-and-so. You guys say that this book, so it's described as a foundational book. What does a functional understanding of this practice look like in daily life?
Who wants to take it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing because it depends who you ask, right? The whole point of the orthopraxy part of it. When we come together for our rituals as a group, we practice a very prescribed way, which is obviously what we lay out in the book. But I will tell you that what I do in my home practice is different from what Stacey does in her home practice, is different from what Rob does in his home practice. Our personal altars, whether it's a singular one for us or multiple ones across our homes, are all going to look different. For example, I don't do statuary. I tend to prefer representations of the deities. But I know, Rob, if you're ever able to get to one of the rituals at his home, you will see he has the pantheon of played out across his home.
And representations too sometimes.
And representations. And I know Stacey is in the process of creating her own set that not only she uses personally, but that can eventually be purchased. And I'll give her a little dig here because I know she won't do it herself at the Accidental Urglaawe. You're back on Etsy now, right?
I'm on Etsy and I have the website. I'll put that in there. I'm dual trad. I belong to a coven, and we do things from a more eclectic pagan perspective. So in my personal practice, that stuff gets incorporated. It's sort of hard to say what does that look like on a day-to-day basis. If you are looking to get started in this religion, I would say, and this is just me as an engineer being really pragmatic, I would say get started by using the book and follow what's in there. And then as you get more comfortable with the observances and you get more comfortable with the deities, then you can start mixing things up. I think the three of us and anybody else that is a core leadership member of Urglaawe will tell you that the only thing we ask is that if you're going to call it Urglaawe, please practice Urglaawe. I would never presume to say that what I practice in my home is strictly Urglaawe, but when I'm with the group, what I do, it's what's in the book. So I hope that made sense. I'm kind of babbling, but
no, it makes sense. I was going to add to it, same general perspective, because we are orthopraxic. When we're together, we all do orthopractic. When we're together, we all do the same things. Now, for as much as I am identified with Urglaawe, I do have a couple. I have only one major thing that kind of diverges from everybody else's. Is that I think that Ala Livetsil as a 12-night event means that you can burn your Butsamot up until the 12th night of Ala Livetsil, which is when Everker Jaeger comes. But Urglaawe canon quote, so to speak, is that we have them burned by sunset on October 31st. So that's what I do with our rituals and everything like that. And that's also what I, encourage other people to do. So, but there is otherwise, I mean, I would say I'm pretty much a strict Urglaawe practitioner, but within that little bit of a discrepancy, it's also letting people. It's also on purpose that I say this, so that people know that they can practice things. If somebody wants to put Jesus on their altar because they have a good connection with him, they may do that in their home, but that's not something that we would say is Urglaawe, and we would not. If you're doing that, don't say that you're practicing Urglaawe by having Jesus on your altar. You can say you include Jesus as part of your personal practice, but it's like a distinction there. And the other thing I was going to say, Michelle said something else but it'll come back in a minute. Stacey, you want to add something? Anything?
No, I can't tell you how many people ask that in the group over the years, and it is, again, you ask 5 different Urglaavers, you're going to get 5 different answers.
You got 10 different answers.
Well, one of the things, though, that I like to say is that if we're practicing it right, you won't see a practice. You'll just see us living our day in an intentional way. And did you remember it? Go.
Oh, no, go ahead. Finish yours because
that's the thought that I wanted to make.
For me, I would say that if you want to really get started with Urglaawe, start noticing things around you in nature. Start noticing things. Take some of the time that you're stressing out about something to just, even in the wintertime, go outside and look around and find something that you haven't noticed about nature. Like whether it's a particular bird chirping or whatever like that, and try to figure out, why is that bird here at this time of year? Like, what is it about that? Most of the birds have migrated. Why is this junco able to stay here and able to survive? And begin to like pan out from that. And also just look for the spirituality in the moment. Look for the beauty in the moment.
I was just going to say, and just to add on to that, I was joking around that I was thinking about writing a book, Confessions of a Lazy Urglaawer, because let's keep in mind that, most of us have our daily lives. I know Stacey is extremely busy with workshops and her art. Rob works a full-time job. I work a full-time job. So a lot of days, my daily practice is my meditations and conversations with deity in the shower at the end of the day. And I think that's important, whether you're practicing Urglaawe or whatever, to recognize that in the simple things in life, in just the quiet moments, you can find deity and you can find practice. And we're no different. And I think maybe even we encourage that more so than what other traditions do, in that because we're so tied to the land and we're so tied to nature and the cycles, not only of nature, but of ourselves as well, that it's important to pick up on those little cues. And once you start opening yourself to that, you're going to recognize that you hear deity all the time and you hear the song of the earth, so to speak, all the time. And that there's nothing wrong with your daily practice being as simple as even sitting in your car at the end of your workday before you go in your house and taking a moment. I don't think that it has to be anything scripted. And, I'll be the first to admit I feel guilty sometimes for not going to my altar on a regular basis. But I feel like because I do have that conversation every night, that I'm still checking in. And I think that's important.
I think it's really important. I think in any practice, so many people ask, how do I start? I want to do this. I want to learn about it. And then when you start to talk to them, you find out that they are practicing it. They are connecting to nature and finding out about things. They just didn't have the context. They didn't have the confidence to say that they were practicing this. And the path kind of appears once you step on it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I mean, the other thing is also, people are used to dogmatic religions where you're saying you're practicing it, but you need an authority to tell you that it's okay that you're practicing it or that you're practicing it right. You've been baptized, so now you can practice it, or confirmed or whatever. You don't really need that. Quite honestly, you shouldn't need that with any religion. But I mean, I get why with Christianity, yeah, it's a requirement for some things. But for us, while we do have rites of passage and stuff like that, people, you're here. The world is your birthright, just like it is everybody else's. We all have a right to be here. We all have the right to pursue happiness. And rather than feeling awful about ourselves and how we're such terrible people by nature of this, original sin that's attached to us, no, we're humans. This is how we are. We sometimes sting, we sometimes bite, we sometimes soothe, we sometimes heal. Striving to be more on the compassionate side within reason, because excessive compassion can also be dangerous. That's what we're here for. We're here to try to make the world a better place for those who come after us and for our next lives.
Yeah. I definitely agree. So, in that same thread, how did you decide what to include when you're balancing cosmology, practice, and folklore?
When the editor started telling us what to throw out.
This book at one point, I think, was what, 480 pages?
Something like that.
We
still weren't done.
Yeah,
Right.
we were up to 90K some odd words, and then we had to cut it back. And
For those readers who are enjoying the book, good news, there will probably be spin-offs.
in our copious spare time.
Yes, there are things that we wanted to include in this book that we were only able to include a cursory overview of. For example, one of them is, I know Stacey and Rob right now are working on a green book.
And by working, by our working, that present progressive tense is being used rather, aspiring to keep moving forward on is probably more accurate. But
I would really like to see there be a book on the moonrod or the Urglaawe Deitsch zodiac. Is a moon sign as opposed to the sun signs.
And we already have beautiful artwork with that part of another. Is there that?
Yeah, Tina already made all the artwork for that.
And then I've been teetering around with the idea of a more in-depth holiday, almost like an altar book or a grimoire just for the holidays. But again, as Rob said, all great ideas, but finding the time to sit down and actually do it is. So no promises, but there's definitely intention there. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that we wanted to include that the editors felt like this was going to make the book too cumbersome.
Especially the runes, because they would have needed way too much space on their own. And even the moonrod. But no, we have to rewrite it.
But fortunately for me, and unfortunately for Stacey, she's able to walk in my mind and picture what I'm thinking and pull up the images out of my mind. So that just means she's one step closer to the home. But
you've also brought up Athena. Can you pronounce Athena's last name?
Athena Dugan.
Yeah. Doing the artwork for your book because it's beautiful.
The inside artwork. She did the inside artwork.
The outside artwork was actually originally drawn by Kate Culliford Good, who she's within Urglaawe from up in Vermont. Got kind of reworked. The basic image is in the. Hold on a second. Let me just get the book and describe it better. Kate designed the double distal fink in the middle for the Urglaawe logo, and the rest of it is kind of been extrapolated by Llewellyn artists. And came out pretty good. I like that book has texture too. So
it's beautiful. It is very beautiful. One of the things that people don't often realize, because everybody associates this with Pennsylvania only, but as you all touched on briefly, this practice exists anywhere. I get Germanic people settled. So like Wisconsin, parts of Canada, New York. I'm missing a bunch of places, but what are the most common locations for this?
Our second city is Chicago.
Okay.
That's our second city. That's for Patricia Niedrich, who I credit with being the co-founder, where she lives. The torch has been passed to the next generation out there, and that is our second city. And that's actually where the president of the Urglaawe organization is Matt Williams, and he's in suburban Chicago. We got people now in South Africa and Australia too. We also have presence in Seattle and Washington and Arkansas, Missouri regions. We have people up in New England, yeah, and Indiana, and so in more and more places. Now the funny thing is that most of those people, pretty much every state in the United States has some Pennsylvania Dutch settlement. Of what significant size, I don't know, but like Missouri and Arkansas have what they call the Whitewater Dutch, and so that region has some history to it. Certainly Maryland, Maryland and West Virginia are heavy Pennsylvania and Virginia, especially the Shenandoah Valley,
Ohio.
a heavy region, and Ohio has such a huge Amish population. The Amish are not us, so we always make sure we say that. For as much as the Amish and many Mennonite groups have tried to eliminate paganism completely from their lore, so we got some stuff from them too. So,
and I think it's also important though to note that you don't have to be Pennsylvania Dutch to practice this religion. It's all inclusive, and we're adamant about that part. So
we are adamant about that part, because quite honestly, again. It is who the gods call and for what reasons doesn't really matter. But so there's no litmus test or anything like that. I know sometimes people who aren't of Pennsylvania Dutch extraction might feel a little bit left out, but their ancestors' contributions and everything need to be honored and hailed and recognized. Everybody's ancestors, we wouldn't be here without them. So, in case anybody failed biology, but
And you describe Urglaawe as a religion of orthopraxy. We've said that several times, but can you unpack what that means for the listeners?
okay. Well, orthodoxy means like proper thought or proper belief, and that by itself has been, I don't know how many millions of people have died throughout the world based on that. The religious conflicts among the Catholics, the Protestants, and all that stuff were based in heresies, the concept of heresies, straying from the proper thought that kept the powers that be in power. Orthopraxy just means proper practice. So when we're together, we have the orthopraxy. We all just do the same thing. But once we leave, again, people have the sovereignty of self over their own lives to worship the way they want to worship. I mean, religion should not be a murder-suicide pact. It just shouldn't be.
It's almost we don't have that wall that you have to pay to get through to talk to deity. You can do that on your own, and we provide you a way. But if you have another way, use your way. It is absolutely non-dogmatic.
We request that we put out to people not identify things that stray from the Urglaawe general practice as being Urglaawe. Like putting, like I said before, putting Jesus on the altar. But you can still do it in your home. We just request, because of the fact that our culture is somewhat, it's still kind of threatened to a degree. But so I don't know if that gets the point across, but most heathen groups identify as orthopraxy with orthopraxy.
It does. And I think there's this big misconception that a lot of practices, and I'll throw Wicca under the bus, right? A lot of practices are supposedly, or people have a general understanding that they are ancient practices. It's okay to have a new practice, a new perspective based off of your study. It doesn't diminish the significance or the power or the relevance of a practice. And of course, this is extremely different than Wicca, but that's just a common misconception that people have about that particular brand of neo-pagan belief. I think it's really great what you guys are doing.
Oh, I was going to say, I speak to that directly in the Rune book about, how many hundreds of years or thousands of years does it have to go on before it becomes a tradition? Who gets to say?
Right.
And I think, we joke too about the fact that like tradition's great, but I don't know about everybody else. I like my indoor plumbing. So the whole idea of reconstructionism is just, I don't know. I feel like it's almost like art for art's sake, and we have to live in the 21st century. So why wouldn't you try to evolve your traditions to incorporate how we live day to day?
Well, I mean, the way I always looked at Urglaawe is we're more deconstructionist or revivalist than reconstructionists, where we took the Deitsch culture and pulled out the parts that actually still had pretty evident heathen core. And even that was hard to separate sometimes, especially in Braucherei, from the Gnostic influences that are there. But Gnosticism and heathenry actually have a lot in common if you look at the orthopraxy version, rendition of it. So we couldn't always necessarily identify whether something came into Braucherei from heathenry or from Gnosticism. But at this point, back in 2011, we decided, we got from that, and we're not going to worry about that. It'll all work itself out, and it has. So we can't claim that we know 100% for sure that everything we do is heathen. I mean, but we live in a modern world we're a religion in a modern world with our modern conveniences. I mean, because religion was not being conveyed by computer 1,000 years ago either. So plus, I also like running water and flushing toilets. But
I also enjoy modern amenities like running water. How do you hope that this evolves in the coming years?
I don't know if there's an answer to that for me anyway. I'm just so almost like stupefied by how rapidly things have been growing just up to this point. What I do hope is that Urglaawe can serve as a safe place, at least for, spiritually speaking, for people of all different backgrounds. People who are just trying to get through their lives and not harming other people. But because we are very inclusive, and so many people have been chased away from by religions, trying to force their orientations and identities upon the adherents, and thereby making the adherents not fit. I don't want us to ever be like that.
Inclusivity is important. And that to me is what like a thriving Urglaawe community would look like. No limitations. Welcome to all those who are respectful, who are seekers with good intentions and a loving heart.
As I said before, we even allow English speakers in our group.
Thank goodness for that, because I wouldn't be allowed otherwise. So thank you. There are so many holidays and the Wheel of the Year part of your book is so rich. Is there one in particular that stands out for you guys that you would like to tell our listeners about?
We're all going to give you a different answer. So
we're all going to give you multiple answers, probably.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, for me personally, Vonnegut is my favorite holiday, partially because I hate cold weather. And to me, like that is like the turning of the time when we get back to warmth and green and flowers and all of that good stuff. But also because I'm a Hala's woman. So it's also when she returns to this realm. Not that she's obviously not around. I talk to her all year round, but it's like she's just definitely much more present. I think it's also like, to me, it's just a time of pure joy. The maypole and being able to have everybody together for that ritual and that celebration is just, it just brings joy. And yeah, so for me, that holiday is really like, that's my favorite, followed very closely by Alalivasu, but
which is probably my favorite. I love the harvest rituals. I always have. That one is one, it was special because it was my first ritual with Urglaawe, and it's also the first one that I hosted at our home. I believe it was the first one. Yeah, we did Alalivatil, and then we did Ostra then after that. So yeah, I love the harvest. I'm a harvest ritual girl. I'm a horned god, girl. So that time of year is right on for me.
And for me, I would have to say, I'm kind of split among several of them, really, but I do love Jäger Sega because, I mean, it's first off, it's, we hold it at my graveyard, which is, the Urglaawe graveyard, and where my family's buried. And plus, Jäger is one of the earliest stories of that related to Urglaawe that I remember hearing. Because my family's from that region. It's Appalachia there. It's in Carbon County. It's just remember hearing the stories of Jäger. When my great aunt was telling us to go in the house when we heard that noise because he could run you over and not even know it. She was Christian, but she was still telling the story. Then second for that one would probably be Sieg Dog of all of them. Sieg Dog because it is a newer observance that spins off of old Pennsylvania Dutch practice. Sieg Dog literally means moving day, and it falls on our Wheel of the Year and like toddlerhood, where change is rapid and sudden and chaotic, and it traditionally fell on April 1st. I have a few people in my life who have been able to talk about having been part of that day where the tenant farmers picked up and moved to a different farm, and all the roads would be full of all these carriages, with all these traditions that went with them, that, your oven is supposed to be, your furnace, your oven is supposed to be arriving at the new property just as your last things are leaving the old property. And sometimes the roads were clogged with these things. And this continues even to a very minor degree today because, auto transport is so fast, but people still who are tenant farmers still do switch properties. And it was April 1st is roughly when it was, because if you think about it, April 1st is a good time to go because you're now in springtime officially, but it's so early enough for you to plant at your new property. But for us, that's also when we kind of recognize these shadier and shadowier and downright, kind of dark figures within our pantheon. Everything is not always love and light. Third would be split between Entstehung, which is the busiest one we got right now, and then Voorjul. Voorjul, which has taken on a life of its own. Let's face it. I mean, Voorjul, the 12 nights before Yule, when we deal with our shadow side, is definitely our most hexic, our very, Hexerei-ish observance, because it deals so much with, inside the self, deep within, the deep dive within the self, and the shadow work. And Michelle is very well versed in explaining all that stuff to everybody.
Surprised you didn't say observance of the desecrated shrines.
Because I don't consider that to be Urglaawe specific.
No,
because it's not. But
very Urglaawe unique, isn't it?
Well, it is Urglaawe unique in that we try to get people of all different pagan backgrounds together on June 5th to recognize the shrines that were desecrated by through acts of religious zealotry. Because let's face it, what Boniface did to the Thor's Oak and to the other shrines was terrorism. If that were happening today, and we had the media on our side, people would call it for what it is. It was terrorism. And as long as the church is sanctifying that as a holy act, I cannot find peace with the saints who did that stuff. I can find saints with the average Christian who believes it, but who believes in Christianity or whatever. I can also, with the pacifist sect from which I come, I can recognize that, but I cannot stay quiet about the fact that religious terrorism has never ceased, and it began back then among our people in Europe and was never really defined as such. And the Catholic Church has never really, made up for that. I don't know how they possibly could. I think they might have atoned for it somewhat, but it is also important for us to recognize that there are many deities that will never have their names or anything like that because of those acts. For me, the most important part of that is for all the people who observe paganism that is founded within some sort of cultural context to come together on that day and recognize the shared challenges that we all face, by being targets of religious bigotry and by being generally powerless to actually combat it. Especially here in the United States, we actually might be luckier than in many other parts of the world where, religions have to register with the states or whatever. So we are fortunate enough, but it also helps to build a sense of community among the pagan religions that we all went through this at some point, at least, the ones that are based in some sort of old culture, and to try to find the strength to unite, to stand against things happening like this again.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you for this interview. Is there anything else that you wanted to chat about this evening or add to our conversation?
Careful what you wish for. You could uncork something, but
Hey, that's why I do this. That's my only compulsion here, is to nerd out with people and learn about our practices.
The Pennsylvania Dutch words are important because they are the culture from which this religion comes. You don't have to pronounce it exactly right, but if you can at least get within within the same zip code,
we have been talking about possibly, and again in our copious spare time, maybe doing YouTube shorts on just each chapter's Deitsch words, because I'm sure we can't read the chapter, but we could probably at least do in this chapter you'll find you'll find these words, and then
I've done them already, in Urglaawe and Facebook groups.
Yeah, because people will be like, "Hey, can you pronounce
for holidays?" Yes.
Yeah.
Like I'll leave it sealed by itself. I mean,
yes. It took me a year to learn how to say that word.
And Wasser
that one will take another 5 years.
Yeah.
Hold on. One more time.
Wasserdorfvergangsgebrauch. That's a water rite of passage, is like a heathen baptism, but baptisms are older than Christianity. But Wasserdorf means water immersion or water sprinkling. Übergang is go over. Gebrauch is ceremony, so it's the rite of passage from being welcomed into the community as a junior member or as a baby being claimed by the community.
Well, thank you all for sharing your work and your insight.
We're going to end like that, and everybody, all your listeners will be like, huh?
What? There's
Wasserdorf Wasserdorfvergangsgebrauch. Here, I'll write that in the...
But I did want to thank you for sharing your work and insight with us. And for listeners who want to explore more, the book absolutely offers a doorway into this practice that's practical, welcoming, deeply thoughtful. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. And if this episode sparked your curiosity, share it with someone who might enjoy it. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a nice
you.
Maxima Bessa.
Maxima Bessa.
Maxima Bessa.